Welcome to Spooky Southcoast.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
AM 1420, WBSM presents.
Good evening and welcome to Spooky South Coast. Happy 4th of July weekend to you. Tim Weisberg here, along with the silent assassin Matt Costa and science advisor Matt Moniz, who just used his noisy cricket on us, and now we have no idea what we were going to be talking about tonight. Oh wait, I remember now. The paranormal, as we do each and every Saturday night. And we have a great guest joining us tonight. Mike Hallowell will be joining us from the UK, which is perfect because it is our Independence Day and we can rub it in. We need the clip right now from President Bill Paxton, Pullman, Paxton. We need the clip of the president telling us that today is the day we celebrate our Independence Day. All right, well, welcome to the show. Hopefully you're done watching the fireworks and you're ready for some paranormal fireworks on our end. Like I said, we have Mike Hallowell joining us. We're very excited to speak with him. He has an article up on the front of SpookySouthcoast.com, so if you go there you can check out that article. You can also watch us on Spooky TV and join in the fun in the chat room as well, because we have cameras all throughout the studio now. We are getting more and more professional as we go along. Well, I don't know if we'd say that.
I hope so.
We're getting more and more professional equipment as we go along. So we will be happy to talk with you during the course of the program. Usually when we connect with a guest during Skype, we have some issues. Last time it seemed to work out all right, so we're hoping that it will do the same again this time. So I'll throw out the numbers to start the show. 508-996-0500, 1-877-996-1420. Those are the numbers if you want to call in at any point during the program and talk with us and talk with our guest, Mike Hallowell. And you can also email us, spookycrew@spookysouthcoast.com, or you can post your questions in the chat room on Spooky TV as well. All right, well, drawing on over 4 decades of research, Mike Hallowell specializes in writing about the supernatural and paranormal phenomena after spending many years in the police service. Mike has written over 20 columns during his career, including Wraithscape, which is the longest-running paranormal newspaper column in the UK, and From Across the Pond, a UFO-centered blog for the IRAAP website, which has been running since 1998. Mike currently pens Mike Hallowell Spotlight for UFO Matrix magazine and the Geordie Monsters blog for the website of the Center for Fortean Zoology. His books include South Shields Poltergeist, Invisikids, The House That Jack Built, Ghost Taverns, Paranormal South Tyneside, and Christmas Ghost Stories, and he joins us now on Spooky South Coast. Good evening, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
Hey, you sound great. It must be pretty late or early where you are.
Yeah, it's currently 3:45 in the morning.
Are you usually up at this time, or is this special just for us?
Well, I'm normally up at this time in the morning for this reason that I suffer from a condition called narcolepsy, which is a sleep disorder, and so it's not unusual for me to be up in the middle of the night, so it's no big problem, really.
You know, and I was reading that on your bio on MikeHallowell.com, and I've mentioned it here on the show in the past. I too am a narcolepsy sufferer. I got the double whammy. I got that and sleep apnea, so I can't stay asleep and I can't stay awake. But it's really interesting that to speak with somebody else that has that affliction, especially because a lot of neurologists that you will talk to will tell you that it may have issues with your perception, that you may, be prone to the occasional hallucination, and that you may not be fully awake at times, and you might slip into that dream state. Because I don't know about you, but I go right into round 4 as soon as I close my eyes. So, does that ever, pose any kind of problems for you while you're working in the paranormal field?
Yeah, I had a really scary hallucination actually yesterday. I met a skeptic, and this guy was actually intelligent, so I knew I was hallucinating.
It's a hoax.
Yeah, it's true. It's probably just a hoax.
Yeah.
But how do you end up someone who starts off with, from reading your extended biography, you first started with an apprenticeship in dental technology. Just the transition from that to police service seems like a pretty interesting story.
Yeah, well, I started my time as a dental technician, and the work was great, but the money was very poor. Then I sort of moved from there to retail sales, where the money was good, but the work was incredibly boring. And I just eventually settled in the police service, where I worked in a crime prevention department in South Tyneside, and I really enjoyed that work. But eventually, the writing bug just got a hold of me too much, and something had to go. You know, when you've been wandering around in a police car at 2 o'clock in the morning, your skills are not at the sharpest the following day, and I found that it was affecting my ability to write, so something had to go. And writing won out, because it's always been my first love. And
while you were doing these other careers, and especially in the police work, was the paranormal already something that you were into researching?
Yeah, I mean, I first began researching the paranormal when I was 11 years old. I had a project to do for school on astronomy, and I spent about sort of 5.5 weeks of the 6-week summer break just lazing around and doing absolutely nothing. And then I realised I had this project to do, and my family and I were on holiday down south, and I stumbled across a book called Flying Saucers Are Real by Major Donald E. Kehoe. I was only 11 years old, and I bought this book, and I unashamedly just cut and pasted pages from this book into my project. I got quite a good mark, actually, but when I read the book, I was hooked. And I realised there was something in the UFO phenomenon, and that was when I was 11 years old, and I've never really lost an interest in paranormal research since.
Well, when you first read that book, I mean, that's a book that, you know, gets a lot of people into it. Being 11 years old, and as we all are at that age, we want to believe that this stuff exists. Did you have any kind of personal experiences either before or early on that made you become more drawn into that, or was it just one of those?
Not at that age, not when I was 11, but when I was about 16 years old, I did have an experience. I was standing with two colleagues near my home, which is near the River Tyne in South Tyneside. It was on Independence Day, funny enough, and we were waiting for the Americans to invade. They never did. But seriously, what happened was I looked up in the sky. I just happened to glance up in the sky, and I noticed that some of the stars, it was a clear night, some of the stars actually seemed to be disappearing. And I thought this was quite strange, and I pointed this out to my two friends, and I said, look, those stars are going out. And we sort of laughed about this, and then as our eyes adjusted to the night sky, I realised that obviously the stars weren't disappearing or going out. There was something underneath them that was obliterating them. We couldn't see them. And we noticed that there was something very large was actually floating underneath the stars, and so we couldn't see them, and it was heading sort of in a northeasterly direction, and it was very big, and we sort of got unnerved at this, and we ran back to my house, and I can't remember who it was. Somebody phoned the police, and the next thing I knew, I got a phone call from RAF Bulmer, which was our nearest air base. There was some guy from the RAF was asking me all sorts of questions, and of course, back in those days, things like privacy of information didn't really count for much. And the next thing I knew, it was all over the press that these three kids in Jarrow and South Tyneside had seen a UFO. So that was my first sort of touch of celebrity status, and I was about 16 years old then.
I was going to say, your UFO career and your media career go hand in hand then. Well, when you were involved with the police work, did you mention to any of your colleagues your interest in the paranormal, or did they mention it to you?
Yeah, I mean, by sort of definition, police officers tend to be quite skeptical, and I think that's what makes them good witnesses. I mean, the police station that I actually worked in was haunted. And I know a number of officers had quite strange experiences. And I had one, a colleague and I, every evening, we used to have to record a bulletin on local crime issues, crimes that had occurred in the area in the previous 24 hours. and this bulletin would then be available to anyone who rang a particular telephone number. And we used to record this bulletin. Now, the problem was that the office that we recorded it in was sort of a thoroughfare between the CID office where the detectives worked and the crime prevention department. And so we'd get halfway through a recording, and then the door would open, this large oak, sort of very creaky door, and it would ruin the recording. So eventually we took to putting a sign outside which said "Recording in progress, do not enter." And on one occasion, we made the recording and nobody came into the room, but when we played it back to check that it had recorded okay, we heard the door open, and we knew that no one had actually came in, yet we could hear the door open on the tape. And then we heard what sounded like a child's footsteps running from the other end of the room towards where we were making the recording. And then the footsteps stopped, and then they seemed to run away again. It was really eerie. And that happened on 2 separate occasions.
Wow. So I guess, I mean, the normally stoic police officers that are probably working there, that probably caught their attention.
Yeah, I mean, some of them, just laughed when we told them this story, and they said we must have been mistaken and so on. As I said, by nature, they're skeptical. But I know that quite a few officers had UFO experiences, particularly. And they, they weren't laughed at, they weren't scorned. People accepted that they had seen something that they couldn't understand. I mean, whether deep down people believed they'd actually seen some sort of extraterrestrial spacecraft, and I don't know that, but nobody seemed to doubt that they'd seen something extraordinary, and they weren't sort of vilified or made fun of because of it.
Well, and I think too, when somebody in law enforcement has an experience and has some sort of sighting, whether it be ghostly activity or a UFO, they live by their eyes. They're trained to be more observant than the average person is. So
this is what annoys me about the skeptics. When some skeptics, not all skeptics, but the extreme skeptics, because they'll say, well, police officers are no better witnesses than anyone else. And I've even heard some skeptics say that they're actually worse witnesses than anyone else. And I personally think this is nonsense, because police officers are trained to be observant and to take note of detail. And I personally think that they do make better witnesses than the average person in the street. And that's no I'm not decrying the average guy in the street. I'm just saying that police officers are trained to be observant, and I think they do make good witnesses.
Especially on the stand. In court.
I'm wondering if it did. Are you able to hear Matt's mic?
I heard somebody talk. I couldn't quite make out what they said.
I said, especially on the stand in court, they make great witnesses.
Yes, absolutely.
Good enough to put somebody to death.
True.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, with here in the United States, we have to deal with not only the skepticism of the average skeptic, but we also have the media scorn. When one of these stories breaks, you always get that kind of tongue-in-cheek approach to the story. Over there, is the news media a little bit more accepting of some of the cases that have made it to the newspapers and to the airwaves?
It's strange. The media has a love-hate relationship with the paranormal. It seems to be that some TV programs, particularly those that we call satellite TV or what you may call cable TV, some channels actually broadcast paranormally related shows very, very heavily, and there doesn't seem to be an issue with that. But the mainstream channels that used to be broadcast on what we called analog and are now broadcast on digital, the 5 main channels, don't seem to touch the paranormal very much. Occasionally they will do, but in the news, occasionally you may get an item on the news where some pilot's seen a UFO, and they may talk about it for a couple of minutes, but it's not really bigged up, as we say. It tends to be very muted and very diluted. I'll give you a classic example. We have a TV station that's broadcast over satellite called Russia Today, and it's an English news program, but it's sort of based in Russia. And there's one particular program where it discussed just yesterday some scientist who said that within 20 years he believed that full disclosure would be made. And I thought, wow, I have to watch this program now. I was actually going out with my wife, so I videoed. I set to record the entire series of programs right on this channel till I got back home, on the basis that I wouldn't miss it. And I went right through them all and I couldn't find this program. So then I found it was being broadcast later, so I recorded it. And when I recorded the program and watched it, this item wasn't there. And I just found this quite strange. Now, maybe there was a rational explanation for this. I don't know. Maybe I just missed it. But I just couldn't seem to find this particular broadcast. And I had an experience some years ago where Linda Moulton Howe was discussing animal mutilations on one particular program. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I must watch this. So I settled down in front of the TV, sort of all excited, wanting to watch this program. And then an announcement was made that the program wasn't going to be aired, and it was replaced by a sort of a biographical program about James Belushi, I think it was. And so I rang the TV company up and I said, why didn't you broadcast this program? And I just got the runaround. I couldn't get a straight answer. And so I became a little bit suspicious. It just seemed very odd to me, because this is something, programs being sort of put in the schedule for broadcast and then being pulled is not something that happens very much over here at all. They did say that they were going to broadcast the program later, and I believe that they did, but it was months later. But at the time, I just could not get a straight answer out of them as to why this program wasn't broadcast. So I do personally think there's a degree of media interference. Where it comes from, I don't really know, but I don't think we get the whole picture. But when you get onto satellite or cable TV, then it seems that the rules are much more relaxed, and we get a lot of good material. And I have to say, right, and this is probably me, well, no, it's not me being nice because it's Independence Day. I'm saying this because it's the truth. Most of the good stuff that we get does come from the States.
All right. Well, we have to take a break for the network news, but when we come back in just a few minutes, it'll be about a 6-minute break, Mike. We'll get more in depth with some of our discussion about police and the paranormal, as well as a whole host of other topics, because we want to find out all about what goes on over there in the country that, you know, we took care of pretty handily a couple hundred years ago. All right, we'll be right back with more here on Spooky South Coast. And during the break, Spooky TV at SpookySouthCoast.com. You can hear and see what goes on in the studio.
First with local news, talk, and sports. This is WBSM New Bedford, Citadel Broadcasting, AM 1420, WBSM.
From did you mute the Skype? Okay, it's not going to go through. I just don't want him to like cough or anything and have it go through. All right, you should be able to hear us now.
Should.
No, just answer the questions.
Who's Kenneth Sousa and why is it calling?
I don't think we're gonna have a problem. I don't think we're gonna have a problem if you want to call in, Dave. You should be all right.
Okay. Kenneth Sousa.
Yeah, I don't know who it is, but just ignore any calls that we ever get on Skype ever. Let me just take my. There, nice. He always takes his shoes off.
Yeah, but at least they're not like overpowering stuff. I've had
Today.
Yeah, today. Bigfoot in the studio.
Probably shouldn't take out cookies and eat them in the same room as Monize's exposed feet.
Those cookies are good. I want another one.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes.
Although she's not watching, we'll have to thank her on the air. Of course I was going to eat it anyway. I knew that was going to happen. And I was going to talk with my mouth full, too. Maybe you should stop trying to watch the show on a 1982 Tandy computer, Philly. And then maybe you'd be able to actually...
What? He's got a 486 processor.
Yeah, that's the finest processor you can find at the dump. We shouldn't choose him. The poor guy's hard drive just crashed. Pretty sure my iPod has 1 megabyte of RAM. Oh, I went to a yard sale last week, and they had like a whole bunch of old computers. Like, and all these old computer parts from like, I don't know, weird stuff with like magnetic tape and all kinds of things. I was thinking we should buy it all and make a spare comp out of it.
Or find that time traveler. Maybe we can find that piece that he needed that he came back in time for.
John Teeter?
John Teeter. Yeah.
This is it, my last cookie. No, so I switched my bucket with Costa's. I can't do that to him, it's his birthday.
Yeah, today's Costa's birthday, people.
And I didn't say it on the air because I don't know if he wants us to broadcast it. I like how we advertise. Oh, during the news break, you can put on Spooky TV and hear and see what goes on in the studio. And all it is just us eating cookies.
And talking smack about other people.
Well, that's what we do best. We're nowhere near as nice and polite as we come across on the air. Carl, we need to see those pictures. Lawsuits. Now I need to go get some more Fairhaven tap water. Moniz, carry the show. Be entertaining.
Oh no, they left me in charge all by myself. And they left their cookies unattended. All unattended cookies will be confiscated. I have to say, really, really good homemade cookies. Chocolate dipped Toll House cookies. Now, that's cooking. Everybody's wishing you happy birthday, Maddie.
Thank you.
I don't know. You'd have to ask our listener, Chops. Super 8 rocks. I heard that was a good movie. I also heard Battlefield Los Angeles was also a good one. Might go see that this week. Or on demand.
I'll say it, I think it's already on home video. Home video, VHS. Hey, Stargirl's here. You ready to come back? Alright, we're going to be coming back, so I am going to be switching the audio back over.
1820 WBSM.
We are the shadow mental health system in America, unheralded and unsung.
Dr. Joyce Berland of the National Alliance on Mental Illness says that families provide 50% of the care for people with mental illness.
And the families are the ones that are, taking to medication, taking to this, taking to that, going after their family members in jail, trying to get them out of jail. It's a real firing line that families live.
Many times, families feel isolated.
Support groups have been spontaneous reactions to that isolation. Support is a human necessity.
Be a moral support for families dealing with mental illness. For more, visit the website shadowvoices.com. For free information on families coping with mental illness, call 800-999-3534. A message from the Mennonite Churches and Faith and Values Media.
Spooky South Coast is back.
I am ready. I am always ready. I have been ready. I am ready.
I can smell your fears. I'm not afraid. You will be. Welcome to Spooky Southcoast.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
All right, welcome back. Hour number 2 of Spooky South Coast here. Tim Weisberg, along with the silent assassin Matt Costa, the birthday boy, and science advisor Matt Moniz. Did you not want us to broadcast that fact today, Matt?
That's fine.
Okay. Well, why don't we just put you on the spot here for a minute while we can. You want to share with everybody how old you are now?
I am 30 years old.
Dirty 30.
Dirty 30.
Do you feel older?
No, I felt 30 a long time ago. So.
Okay, well now we can't trust you anymore, man, because you don't trust anybody over 30, man. All right, welcome back to the show where we talk about the paranormal. You can watch us on Spooky TV at SpookySouthCoast.com, and of course listen to us every Saturday night here on WBSM. Also, the podcasts are all up to date on iTunes and wherever you get the podcast from. I know the birthday boy is working on the updating the archives. How's that coming, Matt?
Slow and steady.
Take the week off. It's your birthday. But we will have everything up to date real soon. All the video archives are up as well. And don't forget, Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. on Spooky TV, you can watch Spirit Connections with Tiffany Rice. And we also have some other programming that may be coming as well. A good friend of ours and a big fan of the show is working on developing a new show, and that should be added to the Spooky TV lineup soon. And speaking of Spooky South Coast and all great contributions that we get from people, Mike Hallowell is our guest, and he's going to be putting some stuff up on SpookySouthCoast.com and joining us hopefully regularly on the show. And we're talking about the paranormal, especially police work in the paranormal, which is one of Mike's areas of research. And Mike, you were mentioning to me over emails before the show the Essex case, and that's something that you wrote about in the blog posting at SpookySouthCoast.com. And that just sounds like quite an amazing case.
Yeah, I mean, can I just check? Can you still hear me okay?
Absolutely, yep. Sounds great.
That's fine. It's just that you were bringing up a little bit there. That's fine. Yeah, the Essex case, basically last August, that's August 2010, I received an email, and the heading of it was just, please help. And I get a lot of emails like this from people who believe that they have paranormal phenomena occurring in their home. And this email was 5,500 words long. Wow. And it was from a police officer who lives in Essex in the south of England. And in this email, she basically detailed a huge list of extraordinary things that had occurred in her home and had been occurring for a number of months. And by the time I got to the end of the email, I thought, well, this woman is either clinically insane or she's really sitting at the hub of an extraordinary paranormal event. And there was a telephone number attached to the email. I rang the number, I spoke to her husband, and very quickly became convinced that they were telling the truth. I went with a colleague of mine, John Triplow, who's a good paranormal investigator. We made several trips to their home. We've got another one coming up in about 2 weeks' time. On the first occasion, there was very little happened. But on subsequent occasions, we witnessed some extraordinary phenomena, objects moving, bizarre things like, I mean, some of them are so bizarre that they're hard to really to describe. I mean, on one occasion, there was a number of police officers there, a number of paranormal investigators, some family members, and at one particular point, there was a spontaneous fire broke out in the house, which this entity in the home had created on several occasions. And after the event was over, we managed to get the fire under control. We all went out in the back garden, and quite a few people were sort of like chilling out, trying to just smoking cigarettes and trying to get their head around what they'd seen. And we found that every single person who was there who was a cigarette smoker had had the cigarette lighter taken from their pocket and replaced by someone else's. And we counted about 9 cigarette lighters that had been removed from people's pockets and surreptitiously put in other people's pockets, whom themselves had their own lighters removed and then put in someone else's. I mean, there was these bizarre sort of things were occurring. Disembodied voices. I received a voicemail on my phone after I'd been speaking at a conference, and I came home and there was this bizarre voice on the other end of the phone, which was identical to voices that had been recorded by the family in the home, very threatening, very intimidating messages. But on a number of, actually, things were so extraordinary, I took a recording every conversation that I had. Whenever I rang the family, I automatically recorded the conversation. And on a number of occasions, we managed to record the most extraordinary things that were happening. And on one occasion, I was speaking to the guy in the house, and he told me that he could smell burning, and he went into the kitchen, and he had a toasting machine on the bench, and this thing had been switched on, and a tea towel had been, a drying cloth had been put inside the toaster, and it was alight. And so he managed to get that under control, and all the time he's talking to me on the phone. And then you could smell burning again, and when he went out, and a lavatory roll, a toilet roll of paper had been placed on top of the toaster. Again, it had been plugged in, and it was alight. And then as he got that under control, there was a third fire in the house, and some items of clothing had been placed at the bottom of a flight of stairs, and they were alight. And when he tried to remove the clothing to take it outside, all the keys in every door and window in his home had been removed, and all the doors and windows had been locked. And so he was effectively a prisoner in his own home. And we recorded some extraordinary events like that. And perhaps the most bizarre of all was on a day when there'd been a number of fires in the house. And this guy rang me up, and he was really upset. And he told me about these fires, and I said, look, you really need to ring the police or the fire service. And now his wife is a servant police officer, and so he decided to ring her, and she came home with some colleagues, and I actually have a statement, right? Now bear in mind that I actually recorded this event on audio tape, so I have a recording of what I'm about to read out to you. But what I'm about to read out is actually a statement that was made by an officer who attended the house at the scene. And I'll read this statement out. You know, this statement, I've read it out at a couple of conferences, but it's never been broadcast publicly before.
Wow.
And I want to read this statement out here, and it is absolutely extraordinary. Now, bear in mind, this statement was made by an officer who attended the scene. Okay, so I'm going to read this to you now. This officer, he said, it was the afternoon of Saturday, the 25th of September, 2010, just after 1600 hours, and I had just finished work for the day. I received a call from Caroline, okay, that's the police officer, on my mobile phone, asking me if I could proceed to her home address as soon as possible, as her partner, Niall Coughlin, was having real problems. The ghost, or entity, was lighting fires by putting tea towels on top of the toaster and then turning it on. Caroline was extremely frightened and concerned for Niall's welfare. I immediately proceeded to the Coughlin home. Caroline and another police officer arrived just as I got there. We entered the premises at the same time. On walking through the front door, I observed two individuals, Niall Coughlin and Lee Luff Atkins, standing in the hallway. Now, I have to say that Lee Luff Atkins is actually a good friend of Niall Coughlin. They were standing in a large pool of water, and it had a strong odour of urine. We could see water falling from the direction of the ceiling, but I could see no explanation for this, as there was no water on the ceiling itself, which was completely dry. The water was just appearing in the air below the ceiling and falling to the ground. The fall of water moved along the hallway in the direction of the ground floor toilet, and as it did so, the water continued to rain down upon the floor. I then observed a series of footprints appearing on the stairs at the bottom of the stairwell and proceeding upwards. They were clearly going up the stairs, but they did not have the appearance of normal human footprints. Some of them seemed to be hoof-shaped. As we were observing the footprints, Caroline and Niall Coughlin were attempting to mop up the large pools of urine present on the floor of the hallway. At this point, a series of loud bangs came from upstairs. It sounded as if someone was walking heavily across the floor. We proceeded upstairs to investigate, but as we reached the landing on the first floor, and that's in what in the US you call we would call the ground floor, you would call the first floor, the banging stopped. We searched the rooms to discover where the noises were coming from, but could find nothing. The rooms were empty. We then proceeded down the stairs to the hallway, but as soon as we reached the ground floor, the banging noises started again. We investigated upstairs again, but could find nothing out of place. This was repeated several times over the course of several minutes. Caroline and her partner Niall Coughlin decided that they should leave the premises due to the things that had occurred and started to gather together their belongings. At this point, I left and proceeded to my home. In the past, I have been very sceptical about the supernatural, etc., only partly believing. But after the day in question, I now fully believe, as I saw things that I simply cannot explain. I really don't know how the family copes with what has gone on in their home.
Wow.
Those officers arrived at the house, and the householder and his friend were in the home, and from their perspective, what they saw, they were in the kitchen, and they happened to glance out in the hallway, and they saw a cloud hanging in the hallway about 15 inches below the ceiling, and this water cascading from this cloud upon the floor. And bear in mind, I actually recorded this conversation, and then they noticed that it wasn't water, it was actually urine, and I could actually hear the sound of this water, this liquid hitting the tiles on the floor in the hallway. It was absolutely extraordinary. And when the police officer Caroline, when she entered her home with her two colleagues, she became absolutely hysterical. I mean, she just couldn't believe what she was seeing with her own eyes, and she just kept repeating over and over again, "This is my home. What's happening to my home? Why is this happening to me?" You know, she just was incredibly upset. And so I spoke to an officer who was there at the scene, and I said, "Tell me, what can you see?" And he said, "If I told you what I could see, I don't think you'd believe me." And I said, "I think I would." Because we'd seen more than enough during our previous visits to convince us that we're telling the truth. And we have several statements from police officers. We have over 30 witnesses who've seen things like what I've just read out to you there, and also things that were even more extraordinary. I mean, my wife and I and two colleagues, John and Triplo and his partner Kelly, were at our home, and this entity had actually spoken the day before to several of the witnesses and intimated to them that the following evening it was going to do something quite extraordinary. So we recorded the conversation, and they were in a public house, a bar, and this thing started to move tables around, it started to spill drinks, it started to levitate tables. This was attracting quite some attention, so they decided to leave and travel to another bar. So they got in the car, and we recorded the conversation, and as the car was traveling from one public house to another, Niall was sitting in the front of the car, his brother was driving, and he said to me, "This thing," he said, "it's pulling at my clothing now, it's pulling at the arms of my clothing, it's pulling at the collar of my jacket," and he was getting quite upset. His friend Lee was in the back of the car, and he had what we call a hoodie on. It was just a jacket with a hood, and all of a sudden this thing grabbed the hood of his jacket and wrapped it around his neck and started to pull it.
Oh, wow.
And I then started to try and, I was desperate to do something to help, but we were at the other end of the country. And I said, look, why don't you leave these people alone and come up here and do something to me now, then, or words to that effect. It didn't. It then turned its attention back to Niall, and this is where things got incredibly grim, because it actually started to beat him ferociously in the car. And on the tape, you can actually hear this guy who works in the security industry, and he's no shrinking violet, and you can actually hear this guy pleading pitifully for this thing to stop beating him. It's one of the most chilling things I've ever recorded, and it's one of the most chilling things I've ever heard. And those are just a small number of the incidents that have happened in this particular house.
Well, when you started describing some of the activity that happened there, you mentioned the spontaneous fires, the banging sounds, the different noises. It sounds like classic poltergeist activity, but now with it traveling outside of the home and following them and attacking them in different locations, and this severity of attack, it sounds like it's something a lot more malevolent than that.
You're exactly right. That's very, very perceptive, because when we first attended the house, we were under the impression that this was a poltergeist, a very ferocious poltergeist, but nevertheless a poltergeist. However, when we were down there was a number of things happened that didn't quite fit in with the normal, following the normal parameters of poltergeist activity. We found, for instance, on a number of occasions that this thing had an extraordinary ability to imitate human beings. I'll give you one example. Caroline, the police officer, when we were there doing one investigation, she took the children in the home to her partner's parents, who lived about 20 miles away. And she was taking them out of the house for the night because she didn't want them there in case anything happened during our investigation, and she didn't want them to become frightened. And so not long after she left the house, as she left, she said, okay, I'll see you guys tomorrow morning. I'll come back tomorrow. And so we said, okay. And then not long after she'd left, the door opened, and I was standing with I think a police officer and the householder. And the door opened, and in she came, and she just said, hi, it's me, I'm back. And she walked into the lounge. And we looked at each other, and her partner said, what's she doing home? She's supposed to be staying at my parents'. And I said, I don't know. And so we followed him into the lounge, and in the lounge was his brother and another paranormal researcher who had travelled down with us. And we said, where's Caroline? And they looked at us and they said, well, what do you mean? She's staying at over at Clacton, we said, no, she's back. She just came in this room. And they said, no, she hasn't. And there was other occasions where this thing actually imitated people. I had a conversation for 45 minutes with Niall's brother Mark, and this is what happened. I got this phone call, and Mark said to me, look, I've been talking with my brother, and he doesn't want you to go back there and do any more investigations or anything. And I said, why? I said, I only spoke to him 2 days ago. I said, he told me he was really looking forward to us going down. And he said, yeah, but he said, the thing is, look, he just wants to draw a line in the sand and move on, and he just wants to put this all behind him. So he appreciates the help you've given him, but he just doesn't want you to go back. And I said, well, I'm really disappointed in your brother. I thought better of him than that. I said, I'm going to give him a ring tomorrow, and I said, and find out why he's taking this attitude. And he said, look, please don't. He's got enough stress on his plate at the moment, enough things going on in his life. Don't ring him, please. Just leave him alone. Just walk away. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. It's not my nature. Sorry, but no, I'm going to telephone. So the next day I rang his brother, and his brother said, he said, what? He said, I never said any such thing. He said, I told you, I'm looking forward to you coming back down. He said, I never told my brother that I didn't want you to come back. He said, I'm going to give him a ring and find out what he's playing at. He rang his brother, and his brother said, I've never spoken to Mike. I never made any such call. And he actually was able to prove that he was working at that time with some colleagues, and he had not made that call. And numerous people connected with this case have received phone calls from other people that connected with the case, and it later transpired that the call had not been made, and the person they were speaking to was not the person who they said they were. So we then started thinking, this is not an ordinary poltergeist, this is something completely different. And we came to the conclusion that it was something that in English folklore is known as a brag, sometimes called a bogeyman. It's by tradition in English folklore the most ferocious and the most to be feared elemental entity of any kind. And we realized that this was what we were actually dealing with, and it wasn't a pleasant thought, because this thing just seemed to be able to toy with our heads with consummate ease, actually. And we realized that we were really up against something that was incredibly cunning, incredibly powerful, and very, very ferocious, and had a horrible propensity for physical violence when it was upset. And we realized then that this was no ordinary poltergeist.
Well, here in the U.S., we don't have a lot of experience, or at least the paranormal community doesn't seem to have a lot of experience with elementals here. And when something like this goes down, they attach more of a religious connotation to it, and they refer to it as a demonic. Is there a big difference between something that's a quote-unquote demonic entity and something that's an elemental?
It's difficult to say. I couldn't really give you a definitive answer on that, right? My opinion, and that's all it is that there is a difference between classic demonic entities of the let's say the Judeo-Christian type, and these entities that are commonly called elementals. I do think there is a difference, and this is one of the concerns that I have, that a lot of people who are faced with this problem quite naturally take refuge in their religious beliefs. And so some of them will go down the road of perhaps contacting a local priest or a clergyman with the idea of having an exorcism done. Now, my real worry about this is that exorcisms are designed to remove or to expel demons in the classic sense. The problem is, if you're not dealing with a demon, if what you're dealing with is something different, then an exorcism is really the wrong tool for the job. And if it doesn't work, then the only thing that you may achieve is to make this thing far more angry than it is. I mean, we've seen what this thing can do when it gets angry. And so this is a concern of mine, actually, that before an exorcism is carried out, or any sort of religious ritual, you really have to be absolutely certain that you're using the right tool for the job, because at the end of the day, you don't want to end up trying to shoot something which metaphorically is the size of an elephant whilst using something like a pea shooter, because it just ain't going to do the job. And that's my worry with these things, actually. I think there's not enough focus put on trying to establish exactly what is being dealt with. But yes, you're quite correct. I think, in the States, I think there is a greater propensity to lean towards sort of a religious interpretation of these things. I'm not saying that that's necessarily wrong. But I think whichever side of the Atlantic we live on, we need to be doubly sure what we're dealing with before we try to tackle it, because if we end up, doing it the wrong way, or we don't understand the nature of the beast, so to speak, then I think we can end up with real problems.
Well, I think that's similar. I don't know how familiar you are with the Lizzie Borden case, but that's actually a stone's throw from where we broadcast from, and we've had the opportunity to investigate that house on numerous occasions.
Yes.
And it's made me rethink the idea of the demonic versus an elemental, because whatever is there is definitely evil by nature. I think it's something far more powerful than just the spirits of the murdered Andrew and Abby Borden. And whatever it is, it just wants to create havoc and create chaos, whereas a demonic might want to achieve the idea of possession, and hopefully perfect possession. It sounds to me like the elemental just wants to cause problems.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. These things, I see no evidence that anyone in that household is possessed. Only in the loosest sense. And by that I mean that in a way it's possessed all of us, in as much as that it seems to be able to manipulate us and to maneuver us into position, almost like moving pieces of chess on a chessboard. And it gets us into a position where it's comfortable with, and then it does something quite spectacular. So if you want to talk about possession, that in that very vague sense, that's about as much as you could say that we're possessed, or anyone's possessed. But in the normal sense of the word possession, I don't think anyone in that household is possessed. I think you're quite right. This thing is there. It seems to take fantastic delight in causing chaos and confusion. It seems to live for doing that sort of thing. And unfortunately, it does it in a way whereas in poltergeist cases, physical assaults and danger to the householders are relatively rare. And with this sort of entity, it really doesn't give a hoot, to be quite frank with you, who's hurt or who isn't. And I would go as far as to say that my perception is that it really doesn't care who lives or who dies. That might sound overly dramatic to some people, but that's the impression that we get when we're dealing with it. It really has very little regard for human safety or human life.
Well, that also leads to the point that it being more of an elemental, whereas an elemental will attack everybody, and transverse, a demonic entity usually singles out a particular person to attach to and try to break down.
Yeah, and in this case, it just hasn't done that. I mean, it affects everyone who goes down there. I mean, we go down and we've seen it do the most extraordinary things in the house. We've seen it do things outside of the house. I mean, lithobolia or stone throwing is something that poltergeists do, but it's also something that this thing does. I mean, on the very first day when this whole affair started, Niall and his friend Lee were in the house, and the knives were thrown at them, and crockery and glasses were thrown off shelves, what seemed to be sort of typical poltergeist stuff. They grabbed the son and they ran out of the house, and as they left the house they were just showered with stones. And the intriguing thing about the stone throwing was that whereas poltergeists normally tend to throw relatively small stones like pebbles, this thing was thrown a mixture of large and small stones, and some of them were quite large, and one of them actually hit the bodywork of Niall's car. And both he and Lee described what happened. They said it was quite bizarre, because when this thing hit the bodywork of the car, it seemed to suffer from what some scientists have called arrested inertia. If you throw a large stone at a motor vehicle, it will hit the bodywork and it will ricochet, it will bounce. But this thing didn't. It collided with the bodywork, and at the point of impact,
dropped straight down. It just
stopped, and it clung to the bodywork like a magnet. And they lifted it off, and of course there was quite a large dent in the bodywork of the vehicle. It was quite badly damaged. On another occasion, there was some reporters from a national newspaper arrived at the house, and one of them parked the car in the drive. And this police officer said, "Look, personally, I wouldn't park your car there, because this thing in the house doesn't like strangers parking their car in the drive." This cameraman said, "Oh," he said, "I'm pretty sure I'll be okay, don't worry." At which point, something just hurtled out of the atmosphere and took a huge chunk out of his windscreen. At which point, he then decided maybe he should move his motor car after all. Better late than never, I suppose. But this is the sort of thing that it would do. I mean, there were occasions when we went upstairs in the house, and we were together, and we would actually go into each of the 5 rooms in the house, and there was a very small landing, right, incredibly small landing. So there's no way that anyone could sneak into a room without being seen. And we would systematically go into every room. We would check that all the windows were shut, the lights were out, and we would shut the door. And after we'd finished checking the 5 rooms, we could then open the door of the first room, and the window would be open and the light would be on. The second room we would open, the window would be open and the light would be on, and nobody ever heard a thing, But there were occasions, when, just going back to the point you made about possession, there was one occasion that I do recall, which was quite terrifying actually, where something happened that may have been some sort of possession. It didn't last very long, but it was quite frightening. We were in one of the bedrooms, And one of the witnesses was sitting on a small divan bed that was used by one of the children, and the household and his friend were sitting on this other bed, and I was standing in the middle of the floor. And one of the witnesses, I think it was the householder, pointed to his friend on the other bed. He said, "There's something wrong with his face. It's changing." And I looked at this guy, and his face seemed to have gone thinner, and his cheeks seemed to have become rather sunk. And it was apparent to me that his face had actually changed. So I decided to take some photographs, and I think I took about a dozen pictures. And at one point, he actually turned and he looked across the room at his two friends, and his face had completely changed. His eyes seemed to have this almost an earthly sort of glow about them. It was quite bizarre. And he seemed to have aged incredibly. And at that point, the two of them just leapt off the bed and raced out of the room, absolutely terrified. And I said to this guy, "Are you okay? And he seemed to be almost in a trance. And then all of a sudden he snapped out of it and he said, "Yeah, I'm fine, I'm okay." And he went back to normal. Now, when we looked at the photographs later, we went through them. And there was one picture that I'd taken just before I'd photographed this guy. And it was of the householder on this other bed on the other side of the room. And when I looked at the photograph, there was something very strange about it, because his legs seemed to be covered with what looked like a large blanket or skin of some kind. And I showed this to the other householders and the people there, some police officers and colleagues, and I said, "What is that thing across his legs?" And they were going, "I don't know, I can't understand it." And Niall looked at it and he says, "Well, there was nothing across my legs when I was lying on the bed. I was just lying on top of the blankets." And then all of a sudden, as we were looking at the photograph, this black sort of blanket or skin or whatever it was that seemed to be covering his legs slowly started to shrink and disappear. The photograph was actually, as we were looking at it on the screen with digital camera, actually changed before our eyes, And this was the sort of bizarre stuff that would happen that just didn't fit the classic poltergeist. More, this was sort of like poltergeist plus. It was poltergeist with extra added weirdness. It was just so strange. And the way that it affected the family initially, obviously they were terrified, but there was once we went to a public house, and this thing started to really act up in this public house, and we made sure that everyone was sitting away from the table, their arms were folded, their legs were tucked under the seats, so there was absolutely no way anybody could be engaged in any trickery. My colleague got down on the floor, he was looking at the underneath of the table, I was observing closely the top of this table in this public house, and you could hear this bizarre noise, and it got louder and louder and louder. And the only way I can describe it, have you ever watched these old sort of pirate movies where you hear the ship's timbers sort of creaking? Mm-hmm. It sounded like that, right? Like the creaking of ship's timbers, and it got louder and louder. And it got to the point where the barman was actually looking across, and you could see he was like wondering what was going on here. And it got louder. We recorded this, and then it started making these tapping noises, and it could tap the number of fingers that you had held up behind your back. Then we recorded voices that we didn't hear at the time, but when we played the tapes back, we could hear these women's voices, and there was no one present. It just started to do all this weird stuff, and we knew then that this wasn't a poltergeist. This was something completely different. It was something we'd never encountered before.
Well, this is definitely one of the most fascinating cases that I've ever heard of. And if you would like to call in with any questions for our guest, Mike Hallowell, you can do so by giving us a call, 508-996-0500, 1-877-996-1420. You can also jump in the chat room at Spooky TV at SpookySouthcoast.com. And Mike, one of the questions that came up in the chat room is somebody wanted to know if the people who are experiencing this elemental, this spirit, this entity, if they notice any other changes when it's present, any kind of changes in the environment, any particular personal feelings?
Yes, that's a good question. On the first visit that we made, we got down there, and this family were very, very hospitable, right? And they'd done a good job. When we got there, they'd basically gathered together quite a few of the witnesses who were there on our arrival. So we decided before we carried out any formal investigation, set of our equipment, that we would interview them all. And I was sitting in the lounge, and all of a sudden I was aware of a temperature drop in the room. And I think that was the very, very first experience that I had. Now, okay, skeptics will say, well, yeah, temperature drop, there's so many things can cause that. Well, it's true. But then there was this breeze seemed to come out of nowhere, and it sort of rustled the papers on my clipboard, the interview sheets, and there was, we checked, there was just nowhere in the room that this could come from. I mean, it was not a really strong breeze, but it was stronger than any breeze you'd feel in a normal lounge of a family home. It just, so you would get temperature drops. There was also, you would sometimes get this sense of presence. With me, it's sort of like my solar plexus, the muscles at the top of my stomach go very tight. Just this feeling that something's around. And Niall, particularly, the guy in the house, he seems to be the one who has the greatest sensitivity to this. He can just sense when this thing is around. And he will often say, I can feel it, it's here. And we may pick up nothing, but within a minute or two, the activity will start, and he's pretty much bang on the nail. He gets it right almost every time. He knows when this thing is present. So it's that sense of presence and fluctuations in the temperature. The other thing is that at the time they had 2 dogs in the house, and these dogs would react very, very ferociously to the presence of this thing. And they did something very interesting. The 2 dogs took to pretty much spending all of the time halfway up the stairwell in the hall. And Niall said to me, why are they doing this? Why are the dogs doing that? And the dogs looked very, very frightened, very apprehensive. And my explanation was that the stairwell was almost like an escape route, so that if this thing was upstairs, they could run downstairs, and if it was downstairs, then they could run up. And that the dogs had figured out that by staying in the middle of the stairs, it was an escape route they could use wherever this thing may happen to be. They could run away from it. So yeah, the animals in the house, there was a parrot that would react sometimes to the presence of this thing. So yeah, there wasn't any marked changes, but it was the normal sort of stuff that you get in most haunted locations. Temperature drops, sense of presence, occasionally a bit of the Oz factor, as they call it, and things like that.
Well, there's a couple other questions from the chat room, but let me throw out the phone number again real quick. 1-877-996-1420, 508-996-0500 if you have a question for our guest, Mike Hallowell. But in the chat room, there were 2 questions that I wanted to pose to you. One was if there had been any history of anybody messing around with any kind of Ouija board or any kind of occult activity in the home, either the current owners or before. And the other question is if it only seems to center around when there's a certain person present.
Do you know what? This is what I love when I do shows like this, right? And when you get intelligent questions asked, right? I so love answering these sort of questions because they're perceptive. The first question, we did some research in a local library, and we found out that there had been a house that stood on the site of their home. Now, bear in mind that this family were the first residents of this house. It's relatively new. It's only a few years old. So there'd been no previous residents lived in the house. However, there had been a cottage had stood on the site of this house in which a guy had apparently committed suicide, and one of the rumours was that he committed suicide because his house was haunted. And we also discovered that there was an unsubstantiated rumour that the cottage next to his had been haunted as well. But the interesting thing was that although the people on the site come and go and the houses come and go, the phenomena stays. And that was one of the things that led us to think it wasn't a poltergeist, because poltergeists are people-centered, people, attached to persons. And this thing didn't seem to be attached to a particular person, it seemed to be attached to the place. The second question, refresh me. What was the second question?
If the second question was if it had centered around anybody as
When
much
somebody,
as,
when somebody was there, yes. We noticed there was a very marked sort of repetition. Niall and his friend Lee, whenever Lee wasn't present at the home, there would be phenomena occurring. It never actually stopped. But whenever Lee, his friend, came, it would increase markedly, and then when he left, it would decrease. And we noticed that particularly. And of course, skeptics would say, yeah, well, maybe this guy was doing stuff then when he came to the house. We considered that seriously and effectively ruled it out. We knew that that wasn't happening because even when he wasn't in the house, there was extraordinary things happening when he wasn't even in the vicinity. But when he was present, it seemed to be not so much the presence of one person. It seemed to be that the householder and his friend seemed to act as a catalyst. Mm-hmm. And when they were both together, it seemed to make this thing worse.
Well, to step away from this particular case for a minute and just speak generally, of course, one of the other things that you research very heavily is UFO activity. Have you seen a correlation in your research between UFO appearances, if there's a rash of UFO sightings, and increased ghostly activity?
Yes. In fact, I'm giving a lecture at a convention which has been organised by UFO Matrix magazine in October on that very subject, actually. That's my specific topic, the correlation between UFO activity and other sorts of paranormal phenomena. And I'll give you one example. Not far from where I live, a lady contacted me some years ago via one of my newspaper columns, and she said that she caught something quite extraordinary on camera. So I went and had a look, and basically she'd picked up her two kids from school. She got back home. The kids were playing with some game system in the lounge on the TV, and she went into the kitchen to make something to eat. She looked out the kitchen window, and beyond the back garden there was a field. And she saw several objects in the sky, which she described as sort of disc-shaped. And sure enough, when I looked at the footage, you could see them. They were in the distance, but they looked like hockey pucks. And it seemed to be that they had a dark centre sandwiched between two lighter layers. And there were several of these things in the sky. And you can actually hear this woman, she was quite taken aback, and as she's videoing these things with her camcorder, she's saying, wow, look at this, can you see this? This is amazing, what are those things? You know, she's talking to herself. Now, when I interviewed her extensively about this, and I said, was there anything happening around that time in your home that was unusual or odd? And she said, yeah, there was. A few days before this had happened, and it had no sort of paranormal phenomena in the home before, but a few days before this happened, my husband had went to light the fire, and a metal grate in the fire, a very heavy metal grate, had just suddenly shot out of the fireplace onto the hearth, and then electrical equipment in the house was spontaneously turning itself on and off. There was one of the children had a small plastic bicycle, a small thing which you could just ride around the house on, and it had some electrical components. You would press buttons and it would make noises and things, and it would just spontaneously switch itself on. There was quite some very weird things happened in the few days preceding this UFO sighting, and in the day after it. And I've noticed this before, that when you speak to experienced who've seen UFOs, quite often they will say in the days preceding the sighting and 1 or 2 days afterwards, they experienced other phenomena which in isolation you could maybe put down to a haunting or poltergeist activity. So the question is, why is there this correlation between the UFO phenomenon, which you would think superficially seems to be completely separate from these other things? So what is the connection, and why is it there? You know, it's a very intriguing question.
And I've heard other correlations between, you know, like Bigfoot sightings and UFOs, and even Bigfoot ghosts. You know, it seems like all these different phenomena seem to cross one another. it's almost like once that window is open, once that veil is pulled back a little bit, kind of anything can bleed through.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this long and hard, you know, and I have a theory, and that's all it is. I can't say that it's true. I can't verify it. It's just it's a theory which to me seems to make sense of everything. I have a suspicion, right, that UFOs I do believe that some of them are purely extraterrestrial and actually come from other parts of the universe. But I have a feeling a lot of them might be more interdimensional. They're coming from somewhere which is not so much a different place, but a different dimension, perhaps in the same space-time coordinates as our own. And I've sometimes wondered whether that, this other dimension is so radically bizarre and different to our own, but in its own world, and to the inhabitants of that dimension, it all makes sense and hangs together as well as our own world does. So all these weird things like UFOs and Bigfoot and all the rest of it, sort of cryptozoological quasi-form animals and things, maybe they all come from one particular place, and together they form like a homogeneous ecosystem that works, but it is just so radically different from our own. And maybe every now and then one of those windows or portals that you speak of opens up, and some of it, that dimension, spills through into our own, and we get little glimpses of it. You know, Bigfoot, you know, I mean, we know there are so many occasions where people have seen them and they describe these things disappearing in a flash of light. I mean, I live in a small residential area. It's the smallest borough in the United Kingdom, right? It only measures a few square miles, and yet in my borough there are actually 6 very bizarre cryptozoological creatures akin to Bigfoot that have been seen on numerous occasions, and yet it's just absolutely impossible from a rational point of view, because there's no way these things could hide and no way they could live. We don't have big woods, we don't have forests where I live. It's predominantly an urban area with very small little pockets of greenery, and yet these things are seen. So it seems to be that they can just come and go, and this is why I suspect there's some interdimensional sort of aspect here that comes into play, that maybe connects up with the UFO phenomenon. Maybe the whole thing, it's just they're all aspects of a different dimension that, as I say, in itself hangs together very well. And if we could actually go into that dimension and see it, we could see how all these bits fit together, almost like an ecosystem that works. But then it spills through into our own, and it's so radically different to our own world that we can't make sense of it.
Well, it's been a fascinating night, Mike. We're actually almost to the end of it here, and I feel like there's so many more directions that we could go with discussing this. But one thing that I will wrap up this discussion by asking you is, do you feel that for the general common person, for the average observer of all things paranormal, that we talked about the police that will share their experiences with you and want to hear about your experiences. Do you feel that they, along with people like clergy, along with people like scientists such as my co-host here, Matt Moniz, as they come out and they talk more freely about the paranormal, do you think that can kind of open up the dialogue more?
Yes, and I think that it's a self-perpetuating process, that the more people in professional positions that are prepared to speak out, then the more other people will feel comfortable about speaking out. And police officers now are pretty much okay with speaking about the UFO phenomenon. I mean, there's a serving detective called Gary Heseltine in the UK who I've spoken to, whom I know, and he runs a website called Prufos. It's a UFO reporting database for serving police officers who can report UFO sightings on this database, and they do. And he's dealt with, I think, it was just something like 800 cases or something like that, he was telling me, in the space of a few years. So, yeah, and people in professional positions are now seem to be more open about talking about this type of thing. That's a process I would like to see continue. The skeptics don't like it, or the extreme skeptics don't like it. I get brutally attacked by them on many, many occasions. simply because I speak out and I encourage people to do the same. And they don't like it because I think they want to live in a safe little world where they can just, live in la la land and pretend none of this stuff happens. Well, it does, and I'm glad to see police officers and others are now openly speaking about their experiences.
All right, well, hopefully, they'll keep sharing. And, of course, they can always share with us at spookycrew at spookysouthcoast.com. And, of course, spookysouthcoast.com is where you'll be able to find more of Mike's writing in the future. But for now, feel free to go to his website, MikeHallowell.com, and he's got all kinds of interesting information up there, some great pictures of people he spent time with in the paranormal.
My email address is also their contact details. If anyone wants to write to me or contact me, they should feel free. We'll answer them.
Oh, that's great. So, and hopefully, Mike, we can bring you back on real soon, and you can become a regular contributor to the show. We loved having you on, and thanks for staying up late. And you didn't fall asleep, so the Provigil or whatever you're taking must be working.
No, because my adrenaline's pumping around my system now. Because the questions I've asked have been so good, and I like answering questions. They're intelligent, and it's been a real pleasure being on the show, and I would be delighted to come back on any time.
Thank you. We say we have the best audience in the paranormal field. They ask the right questions.
I'm sure you do.
All right, so we will be in touch with you. For now, though, don't sulk too much on Independence Day.
No, I promise.
All right. Thanks. Have a good night. That is Mike Hallowell. Again, his his website is MikeHallowell.com, and that is where you can go to find out more about him and find out, if you're traveling and you're going to be heading over to the UK, definitely check out one of his many lectures. He's got all the information up there, his calendar up there, and some of his numerous other appearances on some shows over across the pond. So check him out. It's always interesting to get a take of this stuff from another country, from another society, from another cultural point of view. And I don't know about you, but I feel like, first of all, from hearing about that Essex case, that sounds like one of the strangest things that I've ever heard of. But, we get some new questions to walk away from after hearing what Mike had to say.
I've dealt with a couple of other elemental cases, and it's interesting to see that the similarities are the same there as they are here. But then again, this is old news to people that's been following this stuff, So
then there you go. So if we have any more good elemental cases that come up over here in the U.S., we'll be sure to pass them on to Mike. Maybe we can get him to come over here and investigate some of them. All right, well, that about does it for tonight's show. We have to get out of here and go to Mac Haas's surprise birthday party over at the 7-Eleven. If you want to go there, we'll be having burritos and
maybe some sausage.
Yeah, what are those things? What are those things that they have over there? The
taquitos.
Taquitos. We're gonna go taquitos. All right, so we'll be back next week. We want everybody to have a happy and safe 4th of July holiday and have a happy and safe week. We'll join you back here next Saturday night after the Red Sox, again, to talk about all things paranormal. SpookySouthcoast.com is the website, and you can go there all week long. Tuesday night at 9 p.m., check out Spirit Connections with Tiffany Rice on Spooky TV, and we'll be back Saturday night, 10 p.m., or whenever the Sox decide to let us go on. So until then, for Matt Moniz, for Matt Costa, I'm Tim Weisberg, and we want you all to stay spooktacular.
First with local news, talk, and sports. This is WBSM New Bedford, Citadel Broadcasting, AM 1420, WBSM.
From ABC News, I'm Hillary Barsky. Dominic Strauss-Kahn enjoyed some of his newfound freedom Saturday as he and his wife were out and about in